let's talk about Roger Waters. So Roger Waters gave an explosive interview over the weekend with Michael Smerconish, who is a Philadelphia radio host who does CNN broadcasts now over the past few years. And I'll just sort of set it up by showing you a tweet from Max Blumenthal, who tweeted this. And he said, "This is the first time that I've seen a CNN guest take on the network's jingoistic halfwits to the woodshed on Ukraine and Taiwan so comprehensively in such a short amount of time. And it was Roger Waters who did it." Now, this is stunning because CNN doesn't have on dissenting voices like this often. And it was hilarious to watch. Michael Smerconish is a bit of a fanboy about Pink Floyd and Roger Waters. So he insisted on doing this interview. Right, he was the one that was going to do this interview with Roger Waters, and he dresses up in his black T-shirt so he can look like I'm one of the guys.
Yeah,
I'm hanging out with my boy Roger.
And he even says, "My friend Roger Waters."
My friend Roger Waters, my friend. I'm friends with him. I'm sure. I'm going to hang out with him. I'm going to talk politics and we're going to get to the heart of the matter on Ukraine and Taiwan. But Roger Waters just unleashes a torrent of truth bombs on CNN. Chances like him of him ever coming back on the air are not likely. But let's just play the first part of this interview. Roger Waters taking on CNN. Just watch this.
Well, he's fueling the fire in the Ukraine for a start. That is a huge crime. Why won't the United States of America encourage Zelensky, the president, to negotiate, obviating the need for this horrendous war that's killing.
You're blaming.
We don't know how many Ukrainians.
But you're blaming the party that got invaded. Come on, you've got it reversed.
That's you know, any war. When did it start? What you need to do is look at the history, and you can say, well, it started on this day. You could say it started in 2008. Okay, this war is basically about the action and reaction of NATO pushing right up to the Russian border, which they promised they wouldn't do when Gorbachev negotiated the withdrawal of the USSR from the whole of Eastern Europe.
When you say this, then I have to say, what about our role as liberators? You of all people.
You have no role as liberators.
World War II? World War II? You
got into
First of all, let's just pause it there. I love this. This is always the thing, right? That we've got to go back to this World War II thing. Right.
Yeah.
And he says, and then I have to say, as if someone's telling him to say that we are liberators. And then, of course, they always go back to World War II as the talking point. Well, what about World War II? Well, let's unpack World War II a little bit. Roger doesn't do this, but you wait.
He does.
Oh, he does. Oh, yeah, he does. We wait till 1944 on D-Day to move into Europe, right? As Winston Churchill said, Americans will always do the right thing as the last resort, right? I'm not quoting it exactly. Maybe someone in the chat can give me the exact Winston Churchill quote on that. But like this idea that somehow we're the liberators and that's
of the planet,
right,
is what he's insinuating, right? So in every conflict, then that is our role on the globe.
We're just liberators, and we're going to force democracy down your throat while we don't adhere to it at home. Anyway, here's Roger Waters continuing.
Sir, come on.
Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor. You were completely isolationist until that sad, that devastating,
I would argue we were
day
always going to get in, and that pushed us
Oh,
in.
we were
but
always
thank God
going
the United States got in, right? You lost your father in World War II. Thank God the United States.
But thank God the Russians had already won the bloody war almost by then. Don't forget, 23 million Russians died protecting you and me from the Nazi menace.
Hey, and you would think the Russians would have learned their lesson from war and wouldn't have invaded Ukraine.
Well,
no, the exact opposite of that, you fool. You fool. Maybe they did learn their lesson from Nazis. And maybe that's exactly why they did what they did in Ukraine. Exactly. I mean, this is for 8 years the shelling has continued, right? Why do you think they did what they did?
And they gave us warning. He gave us 8 years of warning that's what he was going to do. He's like, we need to work this out. Let's work this out. But we didn't listen.
Right.
Let him finish because it's great.
Okay.
Roger Waters.
Here's Roger.
And also.
With all your reading, I would suggest to you, Michael, that you go away and read a bit more and then try and figure out what the United States would do if the Chinese were putting nuclear-armed missiles into Mexico and Canada.
The Chinese are too busy encircling Taiwan as we speak. Okay?
They're not encircling Taiwan. Taiwan is part of China. And that's been absolutely accepted by the whole of the international community since 1948. And if you don't know that, you're not reading enough. Go and read about it.
I love this. My favorite, I love where he just keeps telling him, read about it, learn. Because obviously these guys they're not learned on it. They don't know the history of it, or they're willfully ignorant of it.
Or you are only reading online articles that are reducing something to 500 words and you think you're reading. That's not reading.
Right. Sit
You're
down
using
and read
Google
a book.
to do your research.
Yeah. Why did Russia invade Ukraine? Like, let me Google search that and read the CNN articles that come up as a result of it, or the Wikipedia
not the
entry, the garbage, right? No, read books by actual journalists who've spent years in these areas. Read. And he just keeps telling him to read. I love this. And this goes back in his history. I mean, Roger has always talked about reading, educate yourself. I just love how he just dismantles him.
Let's watch the second part, because then he continues to say, these are just media narratives. Like, in the end, he uses a word that I have never mastered. He says, it's all just bollocks.
The Chinese are too busy encircling Taiwan as we speak. Okay?
They're not encircling Taiwan. Taiwan is part of China. And that's been absolutely accepted by the whole of the international community since 1948. And if you don't know that, you're not reading enough. Go and read about it.
Okay. Did we solve anything here today?
Yeah, we did. Well, I mean, no, we didn't.
I mean,
you're believing your propaganda, your side's propaganda.
You're defining it as
Taiwan,
propaganda.
you can't have a conversation about human rights, and you can't have a conversation about Taiwan without actually doing the reading.
Roger, if you're having a conversation about human rights, at the top of the list of offenders are the Chinese. Why is it always the Western world?
At the top of your list.
Why is it
the
always
Chinese
the Western
didn't
world?
invade Iraq and kill 1 million people in 2003. In fact, as far as I can recall, hang on a minute, who have the Chinese invaded and murdered, slaughtered?
Their own.
Bollocks.
Okay.
That's absolute nonsense. Complete nonsense. You should go away and read, but read some proper
Hey, my
literature.
problem is I spend too much time reading your liner notes, okay? Thank you for doing that.
I don't think that's funny. He laughs at like, oh, it's cute I'm being scalded by one of the dudes from the Muppets, right?
The Muppets. Oh, yeah.
Like sort of this, curmudgeon-y, like, oh, he's telling me and it's funny and I'm going to laugh it off. But like he had no actual facts to counter this narrative. He just was pushing his own narrative, and he calls it propaganda.
It absolutely is propaganda. And when you talk about the Chinese slaughtering its own people, what he's probably trying to refer to is the so-called Uyghur story, which you must watch my in-depth interview with Vanessa Beeley. We uncover that and talk about that propaganda, right? So this has been something that's been parroted by Western media. And again, this all comes down to a specific narrative that is driven by corporate media. And he's sitting right there mocking corporate media right to its face. And he's just laughing it off like, oh, this is your list. No, this is your list. China's on the top of your list no. What about the United States, which has invaded all of these countries, which is currently involved in like 9 wars?
Yes.
The cover-ups, the innocence, the millions of people that were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Now, Roger Waters has sold millions of albums based on his political beliefs. And if you listen to any of his music and his writing, you know that he very much stands for what? Anti-government narrative, peace. What else would you say that a Pink Floyd album or a Roger Waters album stands for?
Well, I mean, if you look at like his seminal work, many people believe it's like, The Wall is like purely Roger Waters, right? So if you look at The Wall as, government,
government corruption, government
government
mind
forced
control.
education, mind control,
Single mother raising a kid after losing his father in a war.
In a war, right? You listen to "Amused to Death," one of his solo albums, very much about war and the loss during war. So if Smerconish did spend all of this time reading his liner notes, then you think he maybe would be much more enlightened or educated,
or at least. But why would you love this music if you want to embrace the narrative of CNN? You should. It's almost like, is there anybody who likes both and just doesn't know what they're...
Yeah,
maybe he just
right?
likes it for the guitar solos.
Perhaps. Well, here is exactly what Roger Waters thinks if you don't want to hear his politics. Can we play this little intro that he does at the beginning of his concerts?
If you're one of those, I love Pink Floyd, but I can't stand Roger's politics, people, you might do well to off to the bar.
I love that. That's like the best way, Yeah, exactly. Like if you're just here because you're like a Pink Floyd nostalgic and you don't care about what, I want to talk about here in politics and
Well, but music is his medium of politics.
Right.
If nothing else, right? He's not there to hear himself just play a fun little jingle. He means it. He's trying to disseminate something.
Clifford in our chat, Clifford Pedley says yes. And Roger, one of the few people like sticking up for Julian Assange, right?
Yeah.
Very, very vocal about freeing Julian Assange. Absolutely. Exactly.
Well, I see this being very similar to a lot of people. I've seen it a lot lately where people are going after Rage Against the Machine saying, oh, look, they've just become nothing but woke politics. And I'm like, have you ever listened to Rage Against the Machine? Like they're about as like socialist propaganda. Like that's their whole shtick. And like, so it's amazing that people can like a band and completely miss the message that way.
Yeah. Oh, it's true. Like Sting used to talk about with Every Breath You Take, he said people would come up to me and say that it was their wedding song. And he was like, really? It's a song about stalking someone under Reagan's surveillance America, like stalking people. Like that's your wedding song? He would say, good luck. Every breath you take, good luck. He went on to say in this interview, he talked about, and RT, if you want to actually get like unfiltered stuff, look at RT. He explained why he calls President Biden a war criminal. He's slammed President Trump. Of course, he does whole concerts about Trump, but he slams President Biden as a war criminal. We've called President Biden a war criminal on this show.
Warmonger, we have called him.
I've called him warmonger, war criminal, the merry band of warmongers. So he talks about this. He was, in this, he calls him he says, Joe Biden is fueling the fire in Ukraine for a start. That's a huge crime. Why won't the United States of America encourage Zelensky to negotiate, obviating the need for this horrific, horrendous war? And of course, he goes on to talk about more about that. But yeah, so he doesn't pull any punches, like going after, he's an equal opportunity offender. Like if you're supporting endless wars, he will go after you. He will go after you if you're Trump, if you're George W. Bush, if you're Joe Biden, because they're all part of one political machine. Like we can have little flavors of each of them and pretend that they're different, but they're not.
Well, that's like us too. Like we do the same thing. We don't like you. If you're not for the people and you're not doing what's right for the people and the job that you're supposed to do, we will hold you to account.
Yeah, exactly.